everyone, and welcome to the next episode of Talking Acquisition. This is the weekly high-energy, informative, and slightly opinionated view on all things acquisition, procurement, and government contracting related. This is the place where the contracting community, the acquisition community, and our industry partners connect to talk, listen, and learn from each other. My name is William Randolph, and I'm your host, and I'd like to introduce my co-host, my colleague, my partner, and my dear friend, Soraya Carrera. Hello, Soraya. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. Well, do you realize we are at the end of September?
It's unbelievable. It's literally unbelievable.
It's amazing. It's amazing. And by the way, I shouldn't say this, but we're probably doing another continuing resolution, but I didn't say that. We all know Soraya's not touching on that topic. All right. Well, it's great to see you. It's great to be with you again today, and I hope you're doing well as well. Now I'll do our disclaimer because nobody's ever heard this before. Our podcast shares information and views on a variety of topics that impact the federal acquisition community. Our goal is to provide thought leadership and perspective, not to criticize, judge, or render political opinions, although we have a few of those. We provide this free service because we are former federal acquisition professionals and leaders. We believe that the creativity, innovation, and effectiveness of our community is unleashed when we share knowledge, information, and learning. We hope you enjoy our podcast, and we welcome the views and comments of our colleagues across the public and private sectors. And now, today, we have a special guest joining us for our podcast. Yay! So we're going to talk about IT modernization at speed. That's really the title of our discussion. And this is one of our viewers who volunteered to join us and chat with us today about some of the innovative approaches that they're using. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Jesse White, the Chief Executive Officer of Intact Technology Incorporated, or Intact. Jesse is the Chief Executive Officer there. He brings about 20 years of executive experience in strategic growth, culture development, and managed services in the IT software consulting industry. He focuses quite a bit on his customers' IT modernization goals, making sure that the customers don't have a headache as they go through their implementations and approaches. And I'll let Jesse tell you a little bit more about that. Jesse is also known as a highly rated speaker on many industry-related topics, and he's authored numerous articles and blog posts on subject matters that include leadership, communication, leveraging data to drive business outcomes, software enablement and adoption, and of course, IT software implementation. So without further ado, we're going to talk about IT modernization at speed with our guest, Jesse White. Jesse, take it away. Tell us what you want us to know about IT modernization at speed.
All right. Thank you so much, Soraya and William, for having me. Thanks for making this so much fun.
Oh, thank you. Well, you don't know if it's fun yet. We haven't hit you with the
To be determined.
I'm getting the feeling already. I'm getting the feeling. So let me just share a little bit of our experience with modernization, right? So Intact as a business technically has been in the modernization industry for 27 years. However, the definition of modernization and the needs of modernization, the technology associated with modernization and the approach to it has changed dramatically, right? So from a needs perspective, what we've seen a lot recently, specifically in the government as well, is the need to move forward with these modernization activities at a much faster pace, right? I think citizens demand it in a lot of ways. In a lot of ways, we're also in a global competition, right, as a nation with some pretty large competitors. And I know Congress thinks about that a lot. So from a technology perspective, technology has actually made our job a lot easier, believe it or not, right? In one regard, it complicates things for our customers because there's more of it, right, in a lot of different places. But the technology that's used to manage that technology has actually gotten a lot simpler. We have low-code, no-code platforms now, like ServiceNow, that could allow us to do something in 20% of the time that we could do before. Right. But fundamentally, what we realized, and we realized this years ago, I think there's two things that need to change in the services approach, right, as well. One is that, most services are not outcome-based. And fundamentally, at the end of the day, the reality of it is that any agency is making an investment because they expect and need to achieve a measurable outcome, right? The second side of it is that the services industry in general, if you think about it, hasn't really fundamentally changed in the way that on the way to delivering an outcome to a customer, we are also reducing risk, controlling cost, and fundamentally establishing a partnership with our customers where we have real skin in the game, right? Where we win together or we lose together.
Right.
And so from an Intact perspective, literally for the last decade, this is what we've been focused on. And it's, produced good results for our customers in a lot of cases. And quite frankly, I think gives a strong mission to the folks that work for us, which we're excited about as well. So.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. So Soraya, I've got a quick question.
Lead off. Go ahead.
May I've got a quick question. So Jesse, you mentioned in your first response or your first statement about Congress. And I know a lot of political dynamics that are at play in this space. Do you consider the political dynamics a tailwind pushing us forward, or headwind? It's like, we actually feel like we may be fighting against some of the things that the folks on the ground may be fighting against, some of the things that they're thinking about at the political levels in our country. Any thoughts on headwind, tailwind?
Well, as political as Congress is, I think in a lot of ways, when it comes to this space, it's a relatively apolitical transaction between the agencies and Congress, right?
Okay.
And what we've seen is, in a lot of ways, that the accountability that Congress tends to drive around the use of funds for IT modernization, in a lot of ways, is a very positive thing.
Right. Yeah, that's where I was thinking. The modernization activity has felt like it's been accelerated a bit over the last few years.
Yeah. And if you think about it, in a lot of ways, Congress is the one that is saying we need an outcome for taxpayers, right? Taxpayers are the investors. Then we need an outcome, and we need to see demonstrable, measurable results from this. Right. So we think that's a very positive thing.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Thank you. I'm going to throw in an opinion there that I think it's a little bit of both. Believe it or not, I think it is a headwind, but I also think it's a tailwind. I think it's a headwind in the standpoint that, well, let me say it this way. I think Congress helps us in that they recognize that the federal government has a drastic need to continue to enhance technology. We got to get ahead of our enemies. Our enemies are not driven by the FAR and all those factors that drive us. And we're still a great government that is accountable to its people and tries to do its job. But it's also that oversight function that sometimes hurts us because it instills fear, right? When we watch an agency get berated because they had an unsuccessful program for whatever reason. I mean, other than pure incompetence, right? Sometimes there is a lack of success because you're trying something new or doing something differently, right? And when we berate people for doing that, that instills fear, and then it causes people to not be as aggressive, not be as, I guess, innovative and creative.
Forward leaning.
New thing, forward moving. So I think it's a little bit of both. I do think that, like you, that this isn't partisan at all. It's both sides, whether Republican or Democrat, they are all in support of great technology. I was interested in something you said. I want to talk a little bit about outcome-based, because this is like an emotional topic for me. I am a huge believer in problem statements. Give industry a problem statement. Say, here's my problem. And here is the box that you got to live in, right? Here are the parameters, the things you can't touch. And maybe even here's what my budget is, plus or minus whatever. Help me solve the problem, right? And then let industry come back and give me a solution. I know that's a little innovative, a little out there. It's a little crazy. Talk to me a little bit about outcome-based approaches and any experience you've had with that, where you've actually been able to go in, look at the problem, and develop a solution and implement the solution without major interference from the government, other than the typical, funding delays and that kind of stuff that we know happen.
Sure. So I'll start by saying that I think, to your point, Soraya, there's a lot of need, I think, in the government for outcome-based services. In traditional procurement that we see coming out, right, RFIs and RFPs, we don't see a lot of demand for it. fundamentally, right? And that's one of the things that we're trying to raise awareness around, I think, fundamentally. But in the agencies where we already have relationships, right, and have done work historically and can have conversations about what they want to accomplish, right, and talk about some of the different approaches that they can use to get things done, we actually see a tremendous appetite for outcome-based services, right? The trick with outcome-based services, to your point, is that in a lot of those agencies, we already know the problem. Because we're sitting there, right? And we have experience with it. So the other side of it too is that, fundamentally at the end of the day, an outcome-based service is going to give. So I have a question. Can I stop for a second? I just lost my thought. Can I start over?
Well, keep going.
You guys, okay? You guys like cut this up? Okay.
No, we keep going.
All right, cool. All right, fun. So I think that what we're not seeing most agencies come out with is a demand in any way in the public sphere, right, for an outcome-based service. From an experience perspective, I'll share a couple of things with you guys. Right now, we are in the process of, and going to be going live within the next couple of weeks, maybe by the time this podcast is out, a migration from BMC Remedy to the ServiceNow platform at Department of Transportation. Right. We were on the hook in that implementation to migrate them off the old technology to the new technology, firm fixed price. Right. It was very, very clear. Our guardrails in it were to ensure that we were leveraging that out of the box technology, guiding and leading them towards best practices. But there were not 500 requirements associated with the old system, right? And what the government needed to reproduce. It was actually in many ways a relatively simple procurement, right? But with very clearly defined outcomes. Similarly, right now at the IRS, we are in the process of migrating them off of legacy technology that they've had for 15, 18 years with an enormous amount of technical debt to the ServiceNow platform. And that's actually through an outcome-based managed service. Okay. Where the government is not paying for the implementation as a separate project. It is literally a controlled monthly cost. Okay. All the way across. And our guarantee to them is that if we don't complete that migration on time, within, again, the guardrails of not creating technical debt, leveraging industry best practices, and leveraging the capability of the software that they purchased, then we actually take responsibility for the old system. So we have a significant shared risk and shared cost with the IRS if we're not to complete that on time, right? They actually share the risk in that model, which I think is important, right? Where they would have the ongoing software costs for the legacy platform.
Right, but you have the responsibility for maintaining that legacy platform if you do not deliver, right?
That's correct, absolutely, yeah.
So that leads me to a couple of things. So you said there's not a lot of demand out there for outcome-based. So my question is this: how do you, as a member of industry, how does industry, I'm going to make you on the entire industry like I'm going to be the entire, excuse me, Will and I are going to be the entire federal government, even though
okay, I'm in.
So anyway, but how does industry help government do this better, right? Define that problem and define those outcomes. It can't, so let me throw a little curveball in that question. It can't be incumbents always telling us what our problems are, right? It can't, competition tells us it cannot be incumbents. The president's management agenda tells us you can't keep going back to the incumbents because the industrial base is actually shrinking. Not just the DoD, across the board, it's shrinking. I don't know if you've seen the stats, number of small businesses out there, the number of companies that are winning contracts, it's shrinking, okay? So it just can't be incumbents. So talk to me about how industry helps government think this through and make it happen, more outcome-based, and get solutions kind of like what you're describing now. And you know that I'm now going to be looking avidly to see how successful you are. You know that, right?
Yeah, good. Yeah, it's interesting. I would say at a high level, I think that things are still a little stuck here.
Yeah.
There's a great quote from Upton Sinclair when he said, it's difficult to get a man to understand something that when his salary depends on not understanding it.
That's a good point.
Right.
Yeah, that's fair.
And I think the tricky thing right now is that industry is not motivated to do anything differently. Right. The traditional, if Blockbuster kept on working, why create Netflix? Right. Like, so I think that we're in a bit of a space right now where the government needs to ask more, maybe for innovative solutions to get to an outcome, to put out challenge to industry, maybe to use more RFIs to really evaluate some of the different things that are out there. Fundamentally, I think at the end of the day, I think if Congress were to ask for, from an appropriations perspective, government agencies and procurement shops to try to leverage more outcome-based services, that could be helpful as well. But I think when that lane begins to open up, what you'll see is a lot of, hopefully, right, a lot of innovative providers, but also the creation in certain ways of more of an outcome-based services industry. Because right now, Soraya, the vast majority of incumbents that you talk about are using traditional time and materials or firm fixed price types of projects. And bluntly, that model benefits greatly from delays, from scope creep, and, things taking a long time. Sometimes they even benefit from failure because there's an opportunity to do it again. Right.
Sure. And that's
really
not to blame industry or the incumbents, because we become complacent in general, right? The parties all become complacent, government as well as industry. So I just want to be fair to industry in that respect, because I've seen the complacency that we can develop in the government. I keep saying we, even though I retired. Yeah, well, I know
it comes back really quickly. Yeah. So Jesse, I do have a question. I'm going to ask you to put your industry representative t-shirt back on.
Sure.
And I'm going to ask you a question. You said one of my magic words, which was motivations. And I'm a big believer in motivations and the alignment of motivation and incentives to get things done, the things we want done to get them done. If you were king for a day, okay, what is the set of motivations and incentives? Maybe 2 or 3, whether maybe there's something that's happening in your IRS project or your DOT project. But what are the 2 or 3 incentives that you would say, so government, please listen, I'm king for a day, you shall do these types of incentives and motivations? What would be a couple that would be helpful, in our community?
That's a great question. The interesting thing is that in a lot of cases, there's actually opportunities for a gain share type of model or a true outcome-based benefit. So say, as an example, we have a job to increase service availability across key, business services and applications inside of IT, or to improve productivity through automation and self-service or something like that. All of those things have a downstream cost associated with them either not happening or going the other way.
Sure.
A gain share type of model where industry was, committed in an outcome-based service, but then actually shared in the gain would be extraordinary. We've seen that in our commercial clients.
Okay, cool.
Where that's worked very well. Fundamentally though, William, I think that for a lot of us, the best incentive is the opportunity for growth and doing what we love doing, right?
Yeah.
And right now in the space we're in, it feels like we're in a little bit of a niche where people aren't really asking for what we're doing. Still motivated, but oh Lord, if government started asking, that would really get a lot of people's brains lit on fire.
That is very interesting, because my mind goes directly to the place, when I was in government, I used to say all the time that money wasn't the only incentive, that that currency, like dollars and cents, weren't the only incentives in a business relation, in a business arrangement. So just that the ability, what I thought I heard you say, is just the ability to think and reimagine and create new stuff. That is actually currency. That's a form of currency. So that's pretty powerful.
Without question. And I'll double down on that for a second. So if you look at and especially in the modern workforce, right, with the labor challenges that we have, fundamentally at the end of the day, our businesses are people, and our people stay here because of our culture and because they love what they're doing, and hopefully because they believe in the purpose, right? And what we're eventually accomplishing. And when they start to see the government throw out challenges, I mean, a lot of people got into IT because they were problem solvers, right? When they see the government starting to throw out challenges, that is exciting, right? In the commercial space, we see these like hackathon type of things that get everybody lit up, right? Or these different challenges to industry in different ways. Yeah, that's really exciting stuff for all of us. And it keeps our people engaged and a lot of times happier at what they're doing.
Cool.
So taking the government's perspective on this, because one of the challenges that I found when, that I had a big push on innovation, especially on the procurement side, how we buy, what we buy, how we structure those contracts, what we include, et cetera, and even how we engage with industry. It was one of my big motivators, was to incentivize the procurement community, working in partnership with the program offices, to find ways to be a little bit more innovative, not only to speed up the process. A lot of people like to talk about lower costs and speed up the process when they talk about competition, and that's all well and good. I'm looking for better outcomes. I'm looking for better solutions. I want to know that what we're putting in the hands of our first responders, our law enforcement, our intelligence community, you name it, I want them to have the best of the best. I'm a big firm believer in best value. There's a time and place for low price technically acceptable, and Will and I have discussed that, and it's really over there. Anyway, but here's my big question. So what happens to the government often when they're trying to buy innovation is they get nailed with protests. Let's talk about
nailed with what?
Protests.
Sure.
Protests. Because company A offered this solution and it was a little bit cheaper than the guy that won, or the company that won, the company that won, or they think they were better than the company. Let's talk a little bit about protests. How much do you think protests hinder the ability of the government to be innovative and to seek outcome-based solutions? I'm just curious, just your personal perspective on that, given what you see, especially in the IT industry, because there's a lot of competition in the IT world. When we talk about IT modernization and IT solutions and platforms, et cetera.
It's a good question. I think that to your point before, fear is not a good motivator when we're looking for an innovative outcome, right? And the procurement professionals we know take their job very, very seriously, as they should, right? So I think that protests can slow things down in one way. I also think in another way they're there for a reason, and it's probably a good thing, right, for industry to be able to challenge and say we didn't really believe that was the right thing fundamentally at the end of the day for the government customer. But I think there's something that sits behind that for me, and that is that any procurement officer has a responsibility to lead a fair competition, right, and to have a mechanism to compare value. Right. And that's the thing that we see missing right now. How do you compare value between, one outcome-based service provider and another outcome-based service, right? I've heard you talking to past Soraya about past performance, right? And it only being a probability of, actual success type of thing, right? So I think that's the trick for a lot of folks in procurement departments. It's not so much the protest side of it. It's how do we put together, a procurement mechanism that allows us to compare value across a wide range of potential solutions? And
Right.
again, like, I think that if industry has shown, or certain industry providers have shown the ability to accomplish an outcome in a timely manner, and the contractual terms and conditions are there that tie them into that outcome, then at the end of the day, I don't, you guys know much better than I do, but to me, then, the comparison of value is a lot simpler. Right. Fundamentally, do they have the ability to get to this outcome? Have they demonstrated the capability to do it in the past? And do they really have their skin in the game financially? And have we eliminated the loopholes that, consulting company legal departments are great at creating and contracts? You know what I mean?
Well, so one of the tricky parts about that, again, I'm a huge, you mentioned that I talk about past performance all the time. And one of the things that I've often said to especially the members of the IT community that I've worked with is if you ask for federal experience, you're already behind the power curve. Because a lot of times on the newer technologies, you're already behind. If you're really doing that, because it takes you generally an average 6 months to a year, even if you do a perfect procurement, you're going to probably get delayed by something, be it a protest, a challenge, whatever, right? So you're probably behind the power curve. So talk to me a little bit about comparing commercial past performance with government past performance, knowing that in industry, it's hard to get a formal past performance assessment, right? And I don't exaggerate that. I know that from talking to companies. It's very hard to get, in the commercial side, past performance references, especially of the kind that the government wants, right? Where we're asking about, did the technology work? Did the company do it? You know the questions we ask. Tell me a little bit about that. How would we accomplish? I'm sending you these like hard questions because I got you here.
Yeah. So, I mean, honestly, it shouldn't be that hard to get references in the commercial space if somebody's great at what they're doing, bluntly. We've been working we actually started in commercial and came into government 12 years ago. And our approach to what we do was really born out of that commercial need to get to an outcome quickly for a fixed budget, right? And when we came into government, we then brought a lot of that forward into what we do. The commercial space is always going to be dry. I shouldn't say always. I would say compared to civilian government is always going to be driving harder and faster.
Right.
So when you find providers that do have commercial references, that's usually a very good indicator. Bluntly, there's also a much wider competitive field in commercial. Yes. Does not require a GSA schedule or anything else, right? If you have the capability, you can compete. So that's, I think, good stuff to look at. But I think, to your point, even then, bluntly, if I'm sending you a reference, I know it's good.
Right.
I'll tell you this, like, if I'm looking for a provider, even in my consumer life, I'm looking at the quality of what they've actually produced, which I don't know how we could get a look at that, right? But if you wanted to buy a new house, you might go to an open house and look at what somebody else was doing. But I'm also going to look at fundamentally of the quality and background of the team. Right. And how long they've been around and how successful they've been in doing what they're doing, right? Because you guys know, I mean, a lot of these businesses can fail easily if they're not doing it correctly. But if you see a management team that's been around for a while, you see a company that's been growing for a while, and they are willing to put all of that at risk, right? In, risk sharing, gain sharing, outcome-based types of contracts, that's meaningful, right? They're putting a lot on the line. I mean, the way I think about it, I have 150 families that work for me.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a big deal.
Yeah, no, it is. It is. Thank you, Will.
So the last one I don't want to talk to you about, Jesse, is the idea of, when you talk about innovation, what should the government community what should we be looking? What should what should our government colleagues be looking at? What are the trends that are coming? Is there anything out there that we're like, there really should be, that the government's focus, while I know everybody's got a day job, but somebody needs to be over here looking at this thing over here, because this is the thing 6 months from now, a year from now, a year and a half from now, that will land and either will have extreme exponential value, or it's going to be eating people's lunches. One or the other. Is there something out there?
Yeah. So I'll my perspective is limited in certain ways, right? And we're deep in our space, so I'll share from my perspective. But I think there are two things that we look at and bluntly that we're betting on as a business. One is the use of low code, no code software. Fundamentally, if I'm looking at one of our customers right now, a government customer, where we're laying down a foundation of a low code, no code platform. And that first project is probably like any other, right? Big integrations and ATOs and all that other type of stuff.
Yeah.
The power then of that platform is to rapidly accelerate every other capability that then comes on.
That follows. Yeah, got it.
In an incredible way. It's extraordinary. Like a project that would traditionally take, if the government were to start from scratch, right, and replace a legacy system, a project that would traditionally take 12 to 18 months can now be done in 3 or 4.
Wow.
Because you're not there's so much reuse and so much standardization. And the value of these platforms is that you can now move so rapidly in what is fundamentally now just creating the user stories or use cases that the government actually needs, right? You don't have to build everything else, it's just that other stuff on top. So that's a really, really big deal. The key to that, by the way, is to actually drive standardization and reuse. Because if we implement 20 of the same low code, no code platforms, sprawled out all over the agency, we don't get the benefit of it, right? So that's the pro.
Still spaghetti.
Of that.
Yeah, it's instant spaghetti, but it's still spaghetti.
It's still spaghetti.
Totally. And it's expensive spaghetti too, right? It's
expensive.
These technology providers know what they have, right? And it has a lot of value if you do it right.
Yeah.
The second thing is, I think fundamentally, is to focus on the potential for use of managed services in those types of deployments, right? And here's why. So in certain cases, by the way, managed services absolutely might not be a fit for an agency. But if you think about the speed at which these technology platforms are moving forward, you look at the labor problem just generally across the world with these newer technologies, and then the unique challenges that the federal government may have in hiring and retaining these folks, right? When you then use a managed service provider to get that done, you're laying off all that risk on somebody else. And you also now, if it's a fixed priced outcome-based type of managed service, you also now potentially get the benefit from reuse from work that was done in another agency. Right? Which is a really big deal. In traditional consulting, if you think about it, I would tell you, even years ago when most of what we did was project work, probably 40 to 60% of what we did was the same from one customer to the next. However, have you ever had a consulting company show up and say, hey, we don't need to start at hour 0. We're going to start at hour 4. No, the economic incentive is not there, right? But if you now start thinking about using outcome-based managed services, now the business models begin to change internally, right? And that's what's happened for us in the commercial space and with the limited federal agencies that we work for. So I personally think that the combination of those two things is like rocket fuel from a modernization perspective, right? It's you can move very fast. Now, I think the government now needs to govern that and provide oversight to that and control that properly. And so the role of the government customer pivots a little bit, right? But them performing that role is very, very important as well.
Yeah, I love that. It's
point.
right. I got just one follow-up comment is that I think the value of the third thing that the government might need to be doing is getting folks to understand the business relationships around that type of activity.
Right.
You got to be able to negotiate that contract, to understand it, understand the piece parts, and then be able to negotiate it effectively.
Negotiate it and understand and define those roles and responsibilities, because the roles are changing. It's not a traditional role that the government has had in the past. No, I think that's fantastic. And I know we're coming up on the bewitching hour, as I like to call it, when Will tells me, shut up, I gotta go. So I want to give you an opportunity, Jesse. Is there anything that we didn't ask you that you thought we should have asked you in your limited time today? So is there anything, I'm sure you want to throw some really hard questions at us, no, just kidding. But is there anything that we didn't think about in our conversation? I know that there's not enough time in the day to cover this subject, with great depth, but I think you've done a really good job of talking about the final points. Yeah. So if there's anything that you think of.
No, I think, fundamentally, it's a great conversation, right? And I really appreciate you guys welcoming me into this conversation and for making it so fun. I really just hope the conversation continues.
Oh yeah. Well,
that's a big thing.
Will and I don't let go of this conversation, and I'm very actively engaged, at ACT-IAC on the emerging technology side. I try to work with that team and the acquisition communities of interest, because I am so fascinated by this topic, and I recognize the value and importance of technology to moving our government forward, to moving the services that we provide forward, and creating a better customer experience for whoever the customer may be, whether that customer is actually the taxpayer, or it's that first responder, or a combination of those, or even the people that visit and work in our country that aren't American taxpayers, but that have, some service being provided by the federal government, be that security or what have you. So I think it's extremely important. So we'll take it away, because I know what you're going to ask next. Go for it.
So we got to go to the nuggets. We got to go to the nuggets. So we have one last opportunity in this session. I'd love to follow this conversation up, because you gave me some red meat that I've got to be thinking about. I was like, okay. But what would be a nugget for our collective communities, industry, government, program managers, contract folk, wherever you want to land a nugget, or a holistic nugget? What would be a nugget for the conversation, for the community, to wrap this conversation up?
I would say for contracting folks to look for ways to ask for win-win solutions, right? Mm-hmm. Those real outcome-based vendors have skin in the game. And then I think from an industry perspective, fundamentally, hardware's gone to the cloud, software's gone to the cloud. Consumption model for services hasn't changed yet, and it needs to, right?
Yeah.
Needs to.
Very good point. Very good point.
Awesome. Soraya?
Okay. I'm going to take off on something that Jesse said in the beginning, because this is one of my emotional topics, and it's always got to challenge each other more, both industry and government. We got to ask each other hard questions. Industry can't be complacent and say, oh, well, I'll just respond to that RFP. And, you got to ask the hard question. What are you trying to achieve, government? Where are you trying to go? Got to help the government understand when that solicitation isn't really outcome-based, or isn't really helping define that problem. And yes, RFIs are a good technique to do that, but we see that there are a lot more draft RFPs. And I think industry just has to put its little neck out there, new and old. I don't mean to say old industry, you know what I mean? Incumbents, as well as newcomers into the market, need to ask that hard question. What is the challenge? What is the problem? And I would dare say, do some damn homework. Will's heard me say this. I say this all the time, man. Do some homework before you go visit the agency. Everybody's got a freaking website. Everybody's got a GAO-IG report, a congressional hearing, a budget hearing, right? The problems are out there. They're known. We just got to get out there and have real conversations. So I would say let's challenge each other more. Let's be a little bit more aggressive in the conversation, a little bit more assertive, maybe a little bit more aggressive in the conversation. And let's say, what is it that you really want? What is it that you're looking to accomplish? Don't be so complacent, because that complacency sometimes turns into a failure for both industry and government. And these days, it's not just a government failure. It's a failure for both of us together. It's a partnership.
I love it. I love it. So I'm feeling a theme in our nugget. So I'm going to continue the theme of understanding, homework, and communication. I think for my contracting community, we have to reimagine what these business relationships are going to look like, because it's no longer the rip and replace. That's done.
Yeah.
That's gone. Okay. So if there's a new version coming or here, you have to understand it, be able to understand the dynamics of it, what's at play, what the motivations and incentives are, the business relationship around it. So I'm charging the contracting community here, folks, to lean into some of this new age, these innovations, because the business relationships that you're going to have to build around them won't be the business relationships you wrote and signed off on 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, to your point, Will, one of the comments that I very often make about the contracting communities, we have to understand what we're buying a little bit more than we used to. And we always did have to understand it, but now it's a little bit more important. You really got to read what they mean by cloud and zero trust.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you don't need to take the textbook, just a little paragraph that tells you what it is. Ask your CIO, as I used to always say. I used to bug my CIOs all the time. Well, Jesse, I know that our time is up with you, and I certainly want to express my appreciation, number one, for volunteering to join us. I mean, it's a fantastic conversation, and it takes a lot of bravery to come on our show. No, just kidding. No, we try to make it fun and entertaining, and it's always great to have guest speakers who really have the expertise and the knowledge of what's going on out there. So thank you so much for joining us and sharing your experience, and I hope you'll come back soon.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you both, and thanks for making it fun.
Absolutely. And Jesse, if anyone would like to get in contact with you, give them some info so they can reach out.
Okay, absolutely. So if anybody wants to get in contact with us, you can go to our website, www.intact-tech.com, or they can email me directly, jwhite@intact-tech.com.
All right, and there you heard it. And with that, folks, have an amazing day. Thank you so very much, Jesse.
Wonderful time. Thank you.
As always, Soraya, it was amazing. I've got some stuff now. I'm going to dive into Google now. It's like, I got to figure out this low code, no code stuff.
Oh, careful. Okay. Now he's going to become an expert. Next topic. Low code.
Absolutely. All right. And with that, all the best. Be well.
We will.
Bye-bye.